Senator John Kennedy brought a single manila folder to dismantle Representative Ilhan Omar in one of the most explosive Senate hearings in modern political history. Some people did something. This was the exact phrasing Representative Ilhan Omar used to gloss over the atrocities of the 11th of September 2001 during a speech to a CAIR audience in Woodland Hills, California, on March 23, Liang Isha Zhou. 3,000 Americans perished that morning. Yet, she reduced the monumental catastrophe to 4 dismissive words. 4 words for 3,000 lives. 43 minutes prior, inside the Hart Senate Office Building's hearing room 219, a lawmaker from Louisiana made his entrance. He arrived carrying a weathered, tan manila folder, its corners slightly bent. Its tab bore a single, penciled word receipts. Tucked inside were 4 meticulously labeled sections. Document 1, read money. Document 2, marriage. Document 3, Benjamins. Document 4, 3,000. That final page contained a transcript of her speech, vividly highlighted in yellow, right beneath those infamous words. Senator John Kennedy arrived without witnesses. He required none, for his primary subject was seated directly across from him. Over the next 40 minutes, a plain-spoken country lawyer from Madisonville, Louisiana, would confront Representative Omar with 4 defining questions, the last of which we will call naming the fallen. Let us rewind 43 minutes to the moment Ilhan Omar strode into Hart 219, armed with a brand-new defensive strategy. It was a playbook deeply rooted in identity politics, and it was entirely unprepared for the contents of that manila folder. The hearing room featured rich wood paneling, soaring ceilings, and long fluorescent lights that hummed faintly over the congressional bench. Nearly 5 million Americans were watching the live broadcast. Omar, dressed sharply in a navy blazer and a white headscarf pinned securely at her temple, placed her leather notebook on the table. Concealed within her left hand was a small white card, folded once, containing 3 lines of handwritten notes. She had drafted this strategy in her kitchen at 1,147. The previous night, long after her staff had departed. At this exact moment, she had not yet noticed the tan folder resting on the opposing bench. Senator Kennedy sat beside his unopened file and a simple styrofoam cup of cafeteria coffee, prepared with 2 sugars and no cream. He had waited in absolute silence for 19 minutes. The polite, diplomatic smile favored by institutional leaders like Nancy Pelosi was nowhere to be found in this room. Instead, Omar wore a combative, sharp-cornered expression. It was the hardened smirk of a politician who had marched into 8 hearings over 6 years and emerged unscathed from every single one, including a contentious Foreign Affairs Committee vote in February of 2023, where she survived by a narrow 218 to 211 margin. She walked into Hart 219, radiating that same defiant confidence, bypassing the press section and the gallery. She took her seat at the witness table, maintaining the combative posture she had honed over her tenure. Earlier that morning, at 843, an aide had handed her a bottle of water alongside a critical warning. Kennedy possessed a country lawyer's reputation that opponents frequently underestimated. Her mandate was to avoid engaging with his documents and immediately pivot to identity. Having internalized the advice, she documented it on her white card, folded it, and confidently entered the chamber at 856. Senator from Louisiana, Omar initiated, projecting the deeply practiced cadence she reserved for political rallies. I respect every senator from every state, even the ones who represent states that did not consider me human until 1865. The left-leaning press section physically reacted to the opening salvo, with 3 reporters emphatically jotting down the word drawing in their notebooks. Kennedy offered no immediate rebuttal. He methodically lifted his styrofoam cup, took a measured sip, and placed it back on the bench, while the entire room focused on the gesture. Omar pressed her perceived advantage. And I would note, Senator, that this committee is led by a man from a state whose Senate seat was held for 140 years by men who would have called me property. She allowed the heavy accusation to resonate before concluding, I have heard this script before from men who looked exactly like you. In the wings, her communications director, Jeremy Slevin, monitored his phone. Having served Omar for 6 years, Slevin recognized this tactical maneuver perfectly. It was a textbook opening attack, executed within the first 3 minutes, designed to establish a defensive frame and transform every subsequent inquiry into a referendum on the interrogator's privilege. The progressive reporters responded with quiet, supportive applause. Kennedy waited in absolute silence until Omar concluded. Setting his coffee aside, he retrieved his half-moon glasses, sliding them onto his face as the attached chain caught the overhead lighting. Only then did he pick up the manila folder. He left it unopened. "Mom," he began, his voice dripping with the distinct drawl of Madisonville, positioned north of Lake Pontchartrain and south of the Mississippi border. "My grandfather was a sharecropper in North Louisiana. Picked cotton for a man who would have called him trash, same as you." His gaze remained remarkably calm behind the half-moon lenses. "We are not here today to compare grandfathers. We are here for 4 documents." He laid the folder open upon the bench. As the broadcast cameras aggressively zoomed in, the first pencil-marked tab became visible. Money. Layered beneath it were the subsequent tabs, marriage, Benjamins, and 3,000. The ambient noise in the hearing room evaporated. Omar's grip visibly tightened around her concealed white card. Off-camera, Slevin's phone illuminated with an urgent directive from the DCCC consisting of 2 words, "Don't engage." Slevin chose not to relay the message to his boss. Kennedy flipped to the first exhibit and took another sip of coffee. $3 million, ma'am. Let's start with the money. As his hand swept over document 1, the rustle of the turning page echoed loudly across the silent room. Without looking up, he allowed the cameras to capture the Federal Election Commission filing under the header Ilhan for Congress. It spanned the August 2018 to September 2019. Reporting period was submitted by her campaign treasurer and resided on the public database. Kennedy's copy bore a single handwritten annotation in the margin E Street. "Mom, help me understand something," Kennedy requested, deploying the surgical country lawyer tone universally known to dismantle witnesses. Taking a sip of his coffee, he established the fact. "Your campaign, Ilhan for Congress, public record. Between August 2018 and September 2019, your campaign paid a consulting firm called E Street Group, LLC, $369,000 for consulting, travel, fundraising, digital." He lowered the paper and raised his eyes. "Your husband, Mr. Timothy Minett, is a co-founder of E Street Group, LLC, public record. He has been a co-founder since the firm was incorporated in May 2017, 15 months before your campaign began paying it." The room paralyzed. Omar's knuckles remained locked around her strategy card. Kennedy demanded a definitive response. "Yes or no, Mom? Did your campaign pay the group $369,000 in that period?" "Senator, the relationship between my campaign and yes or no." 3 agonizing seconds ticked away before Omar yielded. "Yes." Kennedy pressed forward ruthlessly. "Yes or no? In the first quarter of 2020, after you and Mr. Minett were married, did your campaign pay the group $292,000 in 3 months?" When she attempted to contextualize the consulting payments, he cut her off again. forcing another reluctant yes. He swiftly summarized the financial reality. Total payments from your campaign to your husband's firm between 2018 and 2022 by Federal Election Commission records, $3 million, ma'am. In the ensuing silence, Kennedy unveiled the second page, an August 2019 District of Columbia Superior Court. Divorce filing Beth Minette versus Timothy Minette. Reading directly from the public record, he noted that Miss Minette alleged her husband confessed on the 7th of April 2019 to being romantically involved with Omar. The cameras pushed in, broadcasting Beth Minette's signature and the court-typed date to the nation. Kennedy masterfully connected the timeline. 6 days after that conversation, Mom, your campaign began paying E Street Group for Mr. Minette's travel expenses, $21,546 in 10 weeks. He paused to drink from his rapidly depleting coffee cup. For Mr. Minette's travel in 10 weeks, while he and his wife were in divorce proceedings, and while you were, by Miss Minette's filing, the reason for the divorce. Turning to a third document, he produced a June 2019 ruling from the Minnesota Campaign Finance and Public Disclosure Board. He forced Omar to admit that the board fined her $500 and ordered a $3,500 repayment to her campaign. When questioned why, Omar briefly looked down before conceding it was for utilizing campaign funds for personal travel to a Florida conference. Kennedy emphasized the gravity. The board found your use of campaign funds for personal travel to be a violation of Minnesota law. Setting the page down, he reinforced the objectivity of the source. That is not a Republican investigation. That is the state of Minnesota. Omar's combative smile sharpened instantly. Reverting to her performative political persona, she accused Kennedy of utilizing the oldest playbook in American history, a white man wielding a folder to scrutinize a woman of color regarding her marriage, simply because the relationship offended him. As progressive reporters nodded in agreement, an Atlantic correspondent underlined the phrase, "investigating my marriage," in his notes. Kennedy absorbed the attack, waiting far longer than the audience anticipated. He picked up his cup, took a deliberate sip, set it down, and slid his half-moon glasses down his nose to peer directly over the lenses. In Madisonville, Louisiana, we have a saying, if a man's wife steals his Social Security check, the question is not the marriage. He let the metaphor hang heavily in the air. The question is the check. As the room maintained a breathless hush, Kennedy delivered the financial conclusion. Your husband cashed 3 million campaign checks. Mom, 3 million. From the third row of the press gallery, a Minnesota Star-Tribune reporter silently gathered his belongings and exited through the side door. Though the cameras ignored him, Omar tracked his departure with her eyes, her smile frozen in place. For his final maneuver regarding her finances, Kennedy presented a document bearing the seal of the United States Treasury's Office of Foreign Assets Control. He read aloud the name of a separate company co-founded by Minette, establishing that the firm's assets had been frozen the previous year by an agency that typically handles embargoes, sanctions, and terror organizations. Kennedy simply asked if, as a sitting member of Congress, she had ever inquired into why the federal government froze her husband's company funds. After a tense 6-second delay, she uttered a stark no. Kennedy thanked her and slid the first section back into his folder. The interrogation was far from over. The hearing pivoted sharply. Kennedy extracted document 2, clearly labeled marriage. For the first time in 40 minutes, the broadcast cameras caught Omar's white strategy card, moving as she gripped it with visible tension. Kennedy laid down a 2009 Minnesota civil marriage certificate bearing the Hennepin County seal. Removing his glasses, he leaned into his country lawyer persona. claiming the paperwork was getting tangled. Replacing his glasses, he established that in 2009 she legally married British citizen Ahmed Noor Said Elmi. She confirmed with a curt yes. He instantly produced a 2016 Star Tribune interview, forcing her to admit she had entered a religious marriage in 2002 to a different man named Ahmed Aden Hirsi. When asked if her religious marriage to Hirsi was dissolved prior to legally marrying Elmi in 2009, Omar's eyes desperately sought Slevin in the wings. Slevin's expression remained tight, refusing eye contact. After 8 torturous seconds, she confessed the religious union was not legally dissolved until 2017. Kennedy synthesized the devastating timeline. From 2009 to 2017, she was simultaneously religiously married to Hirsi and legally married to Elmi. The press remained motionless. Straightening her posture, Omar summoned her rally voice once more. She accused Kennedy of leveraging his wealth, his lawyers, and his privilege to mock the differing traditions of a Somali refugee. "This is cultural Islamophobia with a manila folder," she declared, drawing nods from sympathetic reporters. Kennedy took another sip from his nearly empty cup. Removing his glasses once again, he systematically dismantled her defense. He noted that, in Madisonville, across every Catholic, Baptist, Methodist, Pentecostal, and Islamic tradition, marrying one's brother is universally condemned. Furthermore, he cited Minnesota Statute 609.365, noting that incest is a felony carrying a 10-year sentence. "That is not Islamophobia, Mom. That is the Minnesota State Legislature." Simultaneously, in the gallery's second row, a man in a dark suit opened a folder displaying the seal of U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, writing the word "match" on his notepad. As the cameras briefly focused on his DHS investigator badge, Senator Tim Scott, the sole black Republican on the subcommittee, remained unyielding. Having risen from poverty in South Carolina through relentless labor, Scott offered no defense or physical reaction to Omar's allegations of cultural prejudice. Kennedy advanced to a 2020 Daily Mail article featuring Abdi Hakim Osman, a former friend of the Omar family. Utilizing a slow drawl, Kennedy read Osman's explosive public quote, claiming Omar admitted she needed to get papers for her brother. Despite attempting to discredit the source, she was forced to verify that Osman indeed made the statement. The interrogation rapidly elevated to federal tax records, utilizing joint tax return forms spanning 2013 to 2016. Kennedy compelled Omar to admit she filed joint federal taxes with Mr. Hirsi. Kennedy let the severity of the admissions settle over the room. She had submitted years of joint federal tax filings with a man who was not her legal husband, a matter existing completely independent of their marital status. He compounded the pressure with a 2019 Washington Examiner investigation, detailing dozens of marriage document discrepancies, reportedly triggering a 2020 FBI probe. To close the immigration chapter, he presented a March 2026 transcript featuring Vice President J.D. Vance, explicitly stating his belief that Omar committed immigration fraud against the United States. When asked if she was aware that the Department of Homeland Security was actively reviewing her records, she admitted she knew of the public statements. The hidden strategy card creased under the immense pressure of her thumb. The admissions hung heavy in the air. Yet, the most damaging document was still to come. Sliding document 2 away, Kennedy revealed the third tab, Benjamin's. The camera zoomed in on a deleted but archived tweet, dated the 10th of February 2019. Displaying the screenshot, Kennedy adopted his slowest cadence to read her exact words. "It's all about the Benjamin's baby." He confirmed the timestamp and its origin from her verified account. Turning the page, He read her follow-up tweet from the very next day, where she explicitly named AIPAC as the entity paying American politicians to support Israel, adding a 2012 post where she claimed Israel had hypnotized the world. He secured her confirmation that she authored the text. Taking a sip from his nearly drained cup, Kennedy took the gloves completely off. Dropping his voice an octave, he informed her that equating Jewish people with money is a lethal historical trope. He stated she broadcasted the exact same rhetoric utilized in 1881 Russia, 1897 Vienna, and 1923 Munich to her 3 million followers. The exact trope that ultimately forced his Jewish friends' ancestors into mass graves. As the room sat paralyzed, Omar squeezed her card so tightly it buckled. Defending her actions, she claimed she had apologized and spent years building bridges. Straightening her posture, she dismissed the entire line of questioning as right-wing weaponization of a 6-year-old post, designed to silence a Muslim woman exercising her First Amendment rights. Kennedy patiently evaluated his empty cup before discarding it. Turning to his final pages, he cited her February 2023 removal from the Foreign Affairs Committee. Through rapid-fire questioning, he forced Omar to admit that her comments were publicly condemned by Speaker Nancy Pelosi, Jewish Democrat Jerry Nadler, and the entirety of the House via bipartisan Resolution 241. Having established the sweeping bipartisan rejection of her rhetoric, he began reading from House Resolution 12720, a 2024 censure resolution filed by Representative Don Bacon and co-sponsored by peers to address her extensive history of hateful commentary. He looked up from the page. The resolution, he noted, directly cited her repeated public characterizations of Israel as an apartheid state, alongside her repeated public accusations that Israel was committing genocide. Kennedy firmly reminded her that both of these statements were a permanent part of her public record. Turning to a 6th page, he presented a public statement from Daniel B. Shapiro, the former United States ambassador to Israel, appointed under the administration of President Barack Obama. The statement was issued in 2019. Kennedy read Shapiro's words with a slow, deliberate pace, stating that equating politicians' support for Israel to financial influence remains the oldest anti-Semitic trope in history. He set the document down, emphasizing that this was not a partisan Republican attack, but rather the assessment of President Obama's own ambassador to Israel. The room was consumed by a heavy stillness. Senator Ben Cardin of Maryland served as the senior Democrat on the Senate Judiciary Subcommittee. Cardin, who is Jewish, had dedicated 40 years of his life to serving in the United States Congress. As Kennedy methodically recited the condemnations from Speaker Pelosi and Representative Nadler, as well as the formal House resolution, Senator Cardin refused to look in Omar's direction. The broadcast cameras zoomed closely on Cardin, capturing his hardened expression. He offered no nod of agreement when Omar spoke of building bridges with the Jewish community, and he provided no defense when she alleged right-wing weaponization. The cameras lingered on Senator Cardin for 2 full seconds, exposing to the press section that he was entirely abandoning her defense. An Atlantic correspondent summarized the moment by writing a single word in his notebook, Cardin. Meanwhile, in the wings, Communications Director Jeremy Slevin felt his phone vibrate with a new message from the DCCC. The text contained only 2 words: pull her. Jeremy subtly gestured toward the Democratic ranking member, but she simply shook her head, knowing there was no procedural motion available to call a recess before the allotted time expired. Slevin's phone screen went dark, and he did not pick it back up. Kennedy then turned to a 7th page, revealing a transcript from a 2019 event at the Busboys and Poets bookstore in Washington, D.C. He announced this would be the last item from the current document. Reading directly from the transcript, He quoted her desire to discuss the political influence in the country that normalizes pushing for allegiance to a foreign country. Setting the page down, he repeated the phrase allegiance to a foreign country, reminding her that these were her own words, delivered on her own microphone, at her own event. Peering over his half-moon glasses, Kennedy explained that the accusation of American Jews harboring allegiance to a foreign nation is recognized by historians as the dual loyalty trope. His voice lowered to a quieter register. He detailed how this specific trope was weaponized to expel Jews from Spain in 1492, from England in 1290, and from Russia, Germany, and across Europe over the span of 600 years. Allowing the historical weight to settle, he stated that this was the exact trope that ultimately ended in 1945 at a place called Auschwitz. The hearing room fell completely silent. Kennedy challenged her, asking if, during her 6 years of alleged bridge building, she had ever sat down with a single Jewish constituent from Brooklyn, Boca Raton, or Skokie to ask what the concept of allegiance means to a community whose grandparents were slaughtered because of it. He demanded a simple yes or no. When Omar attempted to deflect by claiming she had engaged in conversations, Kennedy interrupted, insisting on a yes or no answer. 9 agonizing seconds passed, and Omar provided no answer. The contents of the final document, however, would prove to be the most devastating of all. Kennedy slid the third document back into its manila folder. He then extracted document 4, its tab clearly labeled 3000. As the camera zoomed in, viewers could see a speech transcript marked with a bright yellow highlight. The yellow ink emphasized 5 specific words. Some people did something. Kennedy chose not to hold the paper. Instead, he let it rest openly on the bench, with the highlight entirely visible. He slowly removed his half-moon glasses, allowing the chain to swing once before folding them and setting them beside his empty styrofoam coffee cup. He finally picked up the transcript. The atmosphere in the room grew quieter than it had been all morning. "Mom, I am going to read you 5 words," he began, noting that the words belonged to her, not him. Using the slowest cadence he had deployed all day, he read the infamous phrase, "Some people did something." Those 5 words lingered heavily in the space between them. He established the context, the 23rd of March 2019. At the Council on American Islamic Relations Greater Los Angeles 4th Annual Valley Banquet, held at the Hilton in Woodland Hills, California. Letting the location resonate, he noted that the 20-minute speech was live-streamed by Fox News on Facebook and amassed over 1 million views. Turning the page, he pointed out that just 20 seconds before her comment about September 11th, she had instructed the audience to raise hell and make people uncomfortable. Looking up from the paper, he noted the chilling transition. 20 seconds later, she summarized the tragedy of the 11th of September 2001 with the phrase, "Some people did something." Silence dominated the room. Kennedy did not look at her. His gaze remained fixed on the document. This marked the second moment of the morning where the gloves truly came off, as his glasses remained abandoned on the bench. Shifting to his slow country lawyer voice, he announced his intention to name some of those people. From the third page, he read a list of names. Jane Eileen Clear, a 61-year-old mother of 3 from Marshfield, Massachusetts, who was aboard American Airlines Flight 11 on her way to a wedding in Los Angeles. The room remained perfectly still. Wells Crowther, a 24-year-old from Nyack, New York, who was in the South Tower. Wearing his signature red bandana, he bravely walked back into the burning building 3 times to save 18 people. But he did not return from his 4th attempt. The cameras pushed in tightly on Kennedy. He read the third name, Frances Harros, a 76-year-old woman from New Jersey who perished in the North Tower. Setting the paper down, Kennedy stated the number 2000 977. He firmly declared that this number did not represent just some people. His voice dropped lower as he humanized the victims. He took deliberate breaths between each profound statement. They had names. They had children. They had mothers. In the breathless silence of the hearing room, Kennedy turned to a fourth page containing a transcript from the 11th of September 2019 Ground Zero Memorial Service in New York City. He recounted how, on the 18th anniversary of the attacks, Nicholas Harros, Jr., the son of Francis Harros, stood at Ground Zero. Mr. 10, Harros was wearing a T-shirt emblazoned with Omar's 5 dismissive words. Kennedy adopted a slow Louisiana drawl to read Harros' public statement, which questioned why she was confused, given that the country knew objectively who and what had caused the destruction. Setting the page aside, Kennedy read the devastating conclusion of this statement. 19 Islamic terrorists belonging to al-Qaeda murdered over 3,000 people, and that was exactly what some people did. Kennedy remained motionless in the absolute quiet. He elaborated on Francis Harros, explaining that the 76-year-old had been employed in the North Tower for 32 years. Looking back at his notes, he detailed how she was sitting at her desk on the 95th floor when Flight 11 impacted the structure at 846 inches the morning. She survived the initial collision, but was ultimately killed by the tower's collapse 1 hour and 42 minutes later. Turning the page, he revealed that during those terrifying 102 minutes, Frances managed to call her son Nicholas twice from the 95th floor. As the camera zoomed in, Kennedy shared the haunting detail that during the second phone call, Nicholas could hear his mother struggling to breathe through the thick smoke. Setting the document down, he noted that Mr. Harros had spent 25 years begging the nation to remember his mother's name. Moving to the 5th page, Kennedy presented the 11th of April 2019, the cover of the New York Post. The cover featured a stark photograph of the burning North Tower, alongside a bold headline quoting her exact words about the tragedy. Letting the haunting image rest on the bench, he reminded her that this was public record and that the cover depicted the burning building where Francis Harros worked, overlaid with Omar's 5 words. Setting the paper down, his eyes locked onto Omar. He demanded a yes or no answer regarding whether she had summarized the attacks as some people did something during her speech at the Woodland Hills banquet. Omar attempted to argue that the full context of her speech addressed the discrimination American Muslims faced after the attacks, and that she was speaking to a community traumatized by Islamophobia following the New Zealand mosque shootings. Kennedy ruthlessly cut through her defense, demanding a binary yes or no. After 7 seconds of resistance, she finally admitted the phrase appeared in her speech. Through rapid follow-up questions, she confirmed she delivered the line to approximately 500 attendees and that the broadcast reached over 1 million viewers. When pressed on whether she preceded the comment by telling the crowd to raise hell and make people uncomfortable, she tried to explain the context again. Kennedy refused to yield, forcing her to concede with a final yes. At that exact moment, the folded white prep card she had tightly gripped for 53 minutes slipped from her hand, falling face up onto the bench. The cameras immediately zoomed in, broadcasting her handwritten notes to the world. She had written this strategy card in her kitchen at 1,147 the previous night, after her staff had gone home. She had carried it into the room folded in her left hand, having memorized its contents without needing to open it. The card contained 3 devastatingly cynical instructions: pivot to identity, daunt, engage details. If pressed on 9/11 or the New Zealand mosques, never name the dead. The room plunged into an abyssal silence. The seconds ticked by agonizingly. In the first second, Her hand reached out to retrieve the card but froze in midair. By the second, her hand dropped in defeat. In the third second, her lips parted but produced no sound. By the fourth, she closed her mouth. In the fifth second, she anxiously reached for her water glass, lifting it halfway to her mouth before setting it back down without taking a sip. In the sixth second, she felt her headscarf shift slightly at her temple, but made no effort to adjust it. By the seventh second, her desperate eyes scanned the gallery for Senator Cardin, but he refused to look at her. In the eighth second, she looked toward the Democratic ranking member, who also averted her gaze. By the ninth second, she sought out Jeremy Slevin in the wings, but he sat with his phone in his lap, entirely refusing eye contact. In the 10th second, her lips parted silently once more, closing again by the 11th second. The card remained face up on the table, and the cameras held their focus directly on it. The handwritten directive to never name the dead was now visible to 4.8 million Americans. In the wings, Jeremy Slevin's phone screen timed out and went black. He made no move to awaken it. 12 seconds passed, then 13, then 14. Kennedy remained perfectly still. Slowly, he retrieved his folded half-moon glasses and placed them on the bench. He picked up his empty coffee cup, inspected it briefly, and set it next to his glasses. He then collected the manila folder, slowly closing the 37 pages and 4 documents inside. The tab reading receipts was plainly visible. Dropping his voice to the lowest register of the morning, he looked directly at the handwritten card on the table. He reminded her of the 2,977 victims, taking a breath before noting her written strategy to never name the dead. He let the reality settle before stating softly, "I just named 3. The strategy card remained exposed on the bench, her handwriting condemning her. Her combative smile was entirely gone. Kennedy briefly touched his closed folder before asking his final question. He allowed 4 seconds of silence to build before summarizing the morning's revelations in the $3 million funneled to her husband's firm. The civil marriage certificate to a man her friend called her brother, the deleted tweet regarding the Benjamins, the town hall comments concerning allegiance, and the bipartisan censure vote of 218 to 211. Taking a profound breath, he added the weight of the 2,977 Americans who perished that September morning. Laying all these facts bare, he asked simply if she owed the country an apology. The silence was deafening. Omar's hands rested motionless on the table, alongside the exposed prep card, the half-full water glass, and the live microphone. In a final, desperate attempt, she tried to deploy her identity pivot, her voice tighter than it had been all morning. When she attempted to label the proceeding a partisan witch hunt orchestrated by a Republican senator, Kennedy cut her off, demanding a yes or no. When she claimed this was the oldest playbook in history, he simply stated he would wait for her answer. The seconds crawled by. She looked for support from Senator Cardin and the Democratic ranking member, but both ignored her. She stared down at her own handwriting, commanding her to never name the dead. By the 10th second, she cleared her throat. A small, defeated sound was picked up by the microphone. In a diminished voice, she claimed she had apologized many times. Kennedy immediately countered, asking if she had apologized today. 6 seconds passed without an answer. By the 12th, Kennedy nodded once in acceptance of her silence. Opening the folder back to the first document labeled Money, he yielded the remainder of his time to the chairman, declaring that the folder was now entered into the public record for the entire country to read that night. The chairman struck the gavel twice to announce a 30-minute recess, the sharp sound echoing through the chamber. Omar stood up, her navy blazer shifting on her shoulders while her headscarf remained fixed. She abandoned the prep card, her leather notebook, and her water glass on the table. Gathering her phone and water bottle with deliberate, uncertain movements, she refused to look at her staff, Senator Cardin, Senator Scott, or Senator Kennedy. She began her exit toward the side door. The cameras meticulously tracked her 12-step walk of shame. Step 1. Her left hand was entirely empty, having dropped the card minutes earlier. Step 2. The progressive press section sat in stunned silence, their pens resting. Step 3. The Democratic ranking member focused intently on her notebook to avoid eye contact. Step 4. The DHS investigator in the gallery securely closed his folder containing the word match. Step 5. The broadcast captured every agonizing movement. Step 6. The aide who had warned her earlier was nowhere to be seen. Step 7. Her dark phone screen was clutched in her right hand. Step 8. She reached up to touch the temple of her headscarf, though it hadn't moved. Step 9. She dropped her hand. Step 10. The reporters simply watched her leave. Step 11. The cameras held tight on her retreating back. Step 12. She finally reached the heavy door. Pausing at the exit, she heard Kennedy's voice. He was still seated, staring at the open folder. He offered that his door was always open, suggesting she bring her own version of the documents so they could review them page by page. Picking up his empty coffee cup, he quietly assured her that the country would wait for her explanations. She offered no response and walked out. The physical remnants of her destroyed narrative, the open folder, the damning prep card, the notebook, and the water glass remained behind as the heavy door clicked shut, neither slammed in anger nor softened in retreat. By 11:38 that morning, social media platforms were overwhelmed by 4 trending hashtags: number some people did something, number 3000 names, number never named the dead, and number receipts folder. Before the sun set, the 5:3 second clip of her dropping the prep card amassed 78 million views. The brief footage of Kennedy honoring the 3 victims reached 94 million views. The 8-second close-up of her handwritten instruction to never name the dead became the most shared image on the internet that day. Across the nation, grieving families watched history unfold. In Marshfield, a 1-year-old man heard his mother, Jane Eileen Clear, honored on national television for the first time in 23 years. In Nyack, the sister of Wells Crowther watched the broadcast, while keeping her heroic brother's red bandana framed on her mantle. In New Jersey, Nicholas Harros Jr. posted a viral message declaring that a Louisiana senator had finally spoken his mother's name after 25 long years. In Brooklyn, a retired NYPD officer who had carried 4 people from the South Tower before its collapse finally spoke the names of his fallen colleagues to his wife in their living room, breaking a 25-year silence. At 114, Jeremy Slevin released an 11-sentence statement, relying entirely on identity politics. The document utilized the word partisan 3 times, called the hearing a Republican witch hunt twice, and referred to her as a Muslim woman of color 4 times. It even proudly repeated her quote about raising hell and making people uncomfortable. Tellingly, the statement completely omitted any mention of the consulting payments, the marriage certificate, or the names of Francis Harros, Jane Eileen Clear, and Wells Crowther. This omission encapsulated the entire scandal after spending 43 minutes on live television, refusing to name 3 deceased Americans. Her communications team continued the erasure into the evening. This singular Tuesday morning perfectly illuminated the political establishment. For 7 years, they had successfully marketed her to the working class as the voice of a new generation and a fearless truth-teller. Yet that manufactured conscience had devolved into a documented trail of hypocrisy. The record showed $3 million in campaign payments, following a state fine for misuse of funds, a questionable marriage certificate, deleted tweets about the Benjamins, and a speech minimizing the tragedy of September 11th to 5 callous words. 3,000 victims were no longer able to defend themselves against her rhetoric. The party apparatus had shielded a politician who spent 5 years minimizing the terror attacks. Even after Speaker Pelosi condemned her social media posts in 2019, she was allowed to retain her committee assignments. When the 2023 vote arose to remove her from the Foreign Affairs Committee, every single one of the 211 Democrats voted to protect her position. Despite years of anti-Semitism complaints, bipartisan resolutions, and the undeniable reality of victims like Haros, Clear, and Crowther, the leadership consistently chose to protect Ilhan Omar over the memory of 2,977 fallen Americans. They prioritized the political brand, the legacy, and the chamber seat above all else. Tragically, the families of those who boarded planes on that fateful Tuesday morning were left to pay the moral bill. When the Congresswoman exited the building at 1,214, leaving her handwritten command to never name the dead behind, she entered a black SUV with no destination. After circling the Capitol for 18 minutes, her driver asked where she wanted to go, but received no answer. He drove around 2 more times in silence. The undeniable truth is that there is no road in America that offers a comfortable ride home after a country lawyer from Madisonville uses your own public record to expose your strategy of erasing the victims of a national tragedy. Tonight, as the Congresswoman removes her Navy headscarf in the privacy of her home, she must realize that the entire country watched her cynical strategy card fall. The nation read her mandate to pivot to identity, to avoid details, and to never name the dead. The country watched, remembered, and now demands an answer to one lingering question regarding the receipts and the grieving families in Marshfield, Nyack, and New Jersey. Does she owe them an apology? While she claimed some people did something, a lawyer from Louisiana ensured that Jane Eileen Clear, Wells Crowther, and Francis Haros were recognized out of the 2,977 souls lost. The nation is prepared to name the rest, folder by folder, until every single American who perished that morning is honored on a federal microphone. The folder remains on the bench. The receipts are completely public, and the names are finally being spoken. After 25 years of waiting, the country is listening and remembering. The nation holds the names and the receipts. If you followed this gripping narrative, you witnessed the historic morning. A Louisiana senator dismantled a public official using nothing but her own unvarnished public record. Smash that like button if you believe undeniable public records will always defeat a crafted press release. Subscribe to find out who faces the Manila folder in Heart 219 next. Comment 3,000 names if you agree that the senator from Louisiana permanently altered the rules of engagement in the Senate. Leave a comment if you just watched a representative dodge inquiries regarding frozen Treasury assets, or if you witnessed a sitting politician admit to filing heavily disputed tax records on a federal microphone. Share this story with the firefighters, Jewish friends, small business owners, and grieving families in your life who have waited decades for the truth. If you remember the night an American congresswoman accused citizens of buying their politicians, or if you were captivated by a country lawyer from Madisonville naming 3 victims of the 2001 attacks, be sure to hit that subscribe button.